Well, I'm
Um,
glad you mentioned that because in Nashville specifically, there seems to be a divide between the studio musicians and the musicians that go on the road. So, did you find there were any challenges since you were doing both?
um, well, to make this kind of quick, and so I moved here in '83. Played a bunch of clubs, worked really hard, and in '85 I got a Patty Loveless was a new country artist, and I was in her first band. I was there for about 5.5, maybe 6 years, and I learned a lot of really deep diving on guitar parts, tones, and a lot of that is because I was fortunate enough to be in that band where people would come out and they would go, "Hey, you might think about using this other guitar for that sound." And these were guys like Emery Gordy who, they have extensive knowledge of all this stuff because they produced part of the records. And Emery, I don't. Some of your listeners may be familiar with Emery, but Emery was, played bass with Elvis and John Denver, and I mean all these guys back in the day. And moved to Nashville, and was really big in the like Steve Earle. He was on some of those records and co-producing a bunch of stuff. And so when Emery would say, "Hey, I think you might want to try Telly on this song," and go back and listen to Albert Lee or Ray Flack, and listen to what they're playing. You're close, but you might want to, like, oh, okay. So you learn how to do the deep dive and not almost get it. You really have to be sit there until you go, this is it. You know, and again, you're learning to play with inflections and certain things that may not be comfortable to you at the time, but you have to kind of learn those things. And so my challenge was to get the records to be as close to the record as possible with those guys. So at that point, I got into string benders and just trying to get great tones and to be the best I could, and unfortunately falling short every night.
I wouldn't say that. I
Well,
mean, you play, and it's funny you mentioned Patty Loveless. We had Scotty Simpson on here
oh
a few
yeah,
episodes ago, and he brought you up and talking about how great you were as well.
oh,
But I mean, he had a blast playing with you back then, and I know that's how you started. So how did you make that transition into the studio?
well, the transition into the studio was interesting because, like I said, with I was with Patty for probably almost 6 years, and all that deep diving and trying to be a little more, you know, try to play a little more naturally and with more definition and more thought, but yet try to make it feel like you're just thinking of it. Started paying off, and I started getting little calls for demos and things. So I'd be out on the road with Patty for 2 weeks in the summer or whatever, and I'd get a call for two demos. Which the money had. I mean, the demos were good money, but there was never a thought about the money. I always thought I've got to make these right decisions, and the money will figure itself out. And so after a while, it was starting to bug me that I was missing so much stuff when that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I remember hanging up the phone with Patty. I called her. It was around the first of the year, which must have been '91, might have been '92. I can't remember, but I remember hanging up the phone, going from, I'm making pretty good money here with Patty. Hang up the phone, zero. I mean, zero. But she was so cool. She was like, I know you want to get into more recording. So Tony Brown produces me. I would like, why don't you call Tony and call Emery, call these guys. What can you do? You want to come in and sit on some sessions and listen to guys like Reggie Young, Steve Gibson? You want to go? I mean, maybe there's a time when they'll call you to play on some stuff. I was like, wow, she was the greatest, still is the greatest ever. Still talk to her once, twice a year, and one of dearest to my heart. Uh, so I did, and then maybe two calls a month turned into four calls a month, turned into eight, turned into how it was in the late '90s and the late 90s and the early 2000s, I mean, we could just not work anymore. There was no more time. I would leave the house at 9 a.m. and get back home at, 10 p.m. And we do this 5, 6 days a week. And at that point, we were still young enough and I guess young enough and hungry enough to just love it so much that, you know, we say yes to everything because we didn't get called for things, until you do. And then you have this weird thing about saying no to something that you've worked so hard to finally make it to. So you don't say no, you just wear down.
Well, you don't say no because then say no too many times and they're going to stop calling you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I mean, you mentioned Tony Brown. You couldn't have had a better start than that. You start with Patty Loveless, and then you get referred to Tony Brown as one of the top producers in town.
Absolutely.